I'd like to, good evening. I'd like to call this regular council meeting dated February 23rd to order. Is there a late item? We talked about a late item, a potential late item. No? There is no public input. COVID doesn't allow us to have individuals here. And 4.1, regular council meeting, minutes dated February 9th, 2021 needs to be adopted. Can I have a mover? And a seconder? And any errors or omissions? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. There are no delegations tonight, although we do have one under unfinished business, 6.1, Housing Needs Report. And Mr. MacArthur, would you like to introduce Sandy Mackay for us, please?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I believe we're getting some feedback here.
Feedback, yeah.
All right. So Sandy, I believe, is joining us by video, and I'm not sure what we're going to do about that. Okay. So the report that is attached to the housing needs report that's attached to the staff report was prepared by Sandy Mackay's firm, and they were commissioned by the TNRD to prepare housing needs reports for not only Merritt but other electoral areas of the regional district. And a housing needs report is a mandatory document that needs to be received by council as per the Local Government Act, and also published on our website. Now, there's a few items that I'd like to highlight in the report. I'm sure council's had a chance to look at it, but for the benefit of those watching at home, the key findings of the report are that senior populations are rapidly growing here in Merritt, that renting households are more frequent and also less able to meet their housing needs. Homeownership is also becoming more difficult to enter for moderate to low-income households. Non-market and supportive housing is widely needed. That's something that was very clearly stated in the document. And also that there are many community assets, a lot of organizations within the community that are helping on this particular topic of housing, which is great news, of course. The report also outlines a number of recommendations, and in addition to the recommendations, provides action items for staff to look at implementing for staff and council. The first recommendation is that we should promote and protect housing affordability in the market, expand non-market and supportive housing options, address growth in population aged 65 and over categories, manage our growth in the community, and deepen housing partnerships and educate residents. So if I were to sum up the report in three phrases, it would be affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing. The research was pretty clear on that. The input from stakeholders was also very clear, and feedback from residents as well. We need affordable housing in our community. So there are a number of quotes, and I don't know if Sandy is going to be providing those, but I'll just touch on a few of them because there was a lot of great feedback from residents. So I'll just read a few of the quotes here. There is a massive need for a seniors care home, rental units, affordable living housing. There is almost nothing available, 0 rentals for years, less than 20 houses for sale currently. We need more options. The prices of homes in Merritt has gone way up, so has rent, very hard for a single person or a senior. Lack of suitable rentals is a consistent drag on the economy, unable to attract mid-wage residents. Houses are cheaper in environmentally nicer places. Merritt can't just thrive being close to Vancouver. More apartments need to be built, somewhere probably in the ballpark of at least 200 units. Most of the time, apartment units are bought and then rented out. Apartments being much cheaper than a single-family dwelling will alleviate some of the low-income housing concerns. Finding an affordable house in Merritt is getting harder and harder. I know of several young adults that can't find a decent house even though they are both working. Build more affordable housing so our children can afford to move out. That's quite a humorous one. And this one here is quite an impassioned plea. It says, "The people of this town continue to cry out for low-income housing. They wish that every new housing project be low-income. This town has a very high percentage of renters and people who make minimum wage, causing a need for low-income housing as the rental market is in such ludicrously high demand and the odds of getting a rental unit are very slim." And one more here. We need more affordable low-income housing that is designated for low-income rentals, not just suites that people rent periodically that can get sold out from under renters. So those are just a few of the comments. There's quite a few great comments in this report that have come from residents and stakeholders in the community. So it's really great that that community members have provided such amazing feedback for the consultant and for staff and for council. So really appreciate that. And with that, if Sandy's ready, we can turn it over to him.
Perfect. Thanks, Don. Can everyone hear me? Maybe just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. Awesome. So we are testing out a sort of a new system today, so bear with us with any technical difficulties. First and foremost, thank you so much, Don. That is, you're really doing my job for me. A lot of what I was going to go over today, you just touched on. And I also want to recognize how much work that Don and the rest of your staff put into this report. They offered really tremendous comments, and we were able to tailor the report and make it specific to staff's needs and to really get better at representing your community through their comments. So please thank your staff when you get a chance. So what I will do is I will share my screen. But you know, a lot of what was planning to touch on, Don has sort of done for me. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll take a little less time going through the findings. I'll just share some of the high level pieces. And if it's all right with you, we'll use the time to answer any questions that you have rather than focus on presenting the key findings to you again. So I'm going to share my screen. And again, once it's up, if you can maybe just give me let's see if I can get my screen up as well. Yeah, can you just give me a nod if you see? Actually, you know what? I can see it in behind you on those screens. So this is perfect. All right, great. So I'm just going to walk us through some of the key findings. But before I get going, I would like to thank and acknowledge, with respect, the people on whose traditional territory Makola operates. Our offices are located in just outside of Victoria, British Columbia, on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen, the Shwepsum, and the Masonic peoples. And I'd also like to acknowledge the funding support for this project that was received through the Union of BC Municipalities. They're funding this round of studies, and without their generous funding program, we would not have been able to do the amount of community engagement and capture all those great quotes that Don has already shared with you. So as he said, it's not just Merritt. We also did Cache Creek, Clinton, Logan Lake, Clearwater, Sun Peaks, and a number of electoral areas. This ended up being a really useful component of our study. As you all are aware, Merritt is very much a regional hub, and a lot of the housing issues that are happening in Merritt are also happening in the surrounding electoral areas and in the surrounding communities. And many of the people who are accessing the services in Merritt are coming from those communities or are maybe even commuting in for work, things like that. So really important to capture these needs regionally as well as locally. In your report, there's a couple things that you're going to get and a couple of things that you're not going to get. So in the report is what's happening. It's local and regional information on demography, households, incomes, economy, and housing affordability. It's also who it's happening to. So that's where you get your engagement data, your affordability analysis, which actually looks at which households and income groups are struggling the most to meet their housing needs. What's not in this report is the next steps, the implementation, where that new housing should go, the form or density that that housing should take. That's up to you to make decisions on how to act on the information in this report and how to support your community through things like your OCP, through zoning bylaw updates, partnership development, community education, etc. As Don mentioned, we did include a number of recommendations, but those recommendations are really only a starting point. The intricacies of how you actually proceed with those recommendations are the next place to go. We have included a policy sort of tools guide for you, which you can use to maybe inform those next steps a little bit. But truly, you require a made in Merritt solution, and the way to get there is by sort of taking that next jump as a community together. So your report itself has 6 components. Along with that, in housing tools and policy guide that I mentioned, you're also getting the City of Merritt Housing Needs Report, which I actually saw a couple of you with copies in front of you, which is great. You're also getting a community housing summary or profile, which is a 4-page infographic document. And that's kind of the communications piece of this. Many of your community members aren't probably going to pick up the full report and read it. Many of those that do are probably just going to read the executive summary. So for those that maybe don't want to read either of those things, there is this 4-page summary that has the highest level data that we collected. It's got things like income, it's got the affordability analysis, and it's all represented through infographics. So that's a great piece to share when people just want the quick bites of what this report is saying. We've also got an indicators and monitoring guide, which should help you in over the course of the next 5 years or even sooner, continue to monitor and repeat this report. And then lastly, there is a full engagement summary if you want to look at all of the engagement, not just the stuff we pulled for the Merritt report. And then the last piece are these community data tables, which are more useful for staff. They are sort of the raw data that we pulled to make this report. They check some of the ministry's boxes, but they aren't particularly useful or relevant to you as decision makers or to your community members. They don't contain narrative, they just contain numbers. So again, the key findings, I appreciate that Don has done a lot of this work for me, so I'm going to run through them a little quicker than I might normally. But I'll start here. So though it may seem drastic and it may seem that housing is really a struggle in Merritt, that is absolutely true, and a number of your community members are struggling. But overall, Merritt is still reasonably affordable, especially to households who are making moderate to above moderate incomes. Actually, your overall housing conditions improved between 2006 to 2016, according to some metrics. But that affordability condition will make your community more desirable to people coming from other communities or who are looking for a place to settle. And with that desirability becomes, increased prices, which maybe drive some of the unaffordability that we know is an issue. So over that same 2006 to 2016, though, overall conditions did improve. Housing conditions worsened for renters. Fully 1/3 of your renters are now in core housing need, which is the kind of the catch-all stat that we use to quantify need. You do have an aging population, though you definitely are a younger community than some of the others in the study area. You have an aging population that's going to challenge and present a need for different types of housing, along with housing that has specialized supports. Rental availability and condition continues to be a challenge. It's very difficult to find a rental. When you do find a rental, many people told us that their rentals were not in good condition. And many people told us that they were overextending their finances to get into a rental unit. But along with that, your rates of rentership have increased over the past 5 years since the last census and 10 years since the census before. And housing markets are expanding, and pressures from the Lower Mainland, from the Fraser Valley, and from Kamloops are really starting to impact your market in Merritt. That we don't have data on 2020, unfortunately. We've only got some tail end data on 2019, but across the board, people are telling us that they're seeing more people moving to communities like Merritt for, the amenity, the lifestyle, the ability to get outside. COVID-19 has had a really big impact on communities like yours, and we would expect that would continue as people continue to move from higher purchasing power markets into communities like yours. So though there are some real positives to take away, there's definitely need in your community, and this report should encourage action, not complacency. So I have a couple of slides here on population change, but I will kind of just give you the high-level details. Your community is growing. Over 2006 to 2016, you grew by about 3%, but our models project a higher rate of growth between 2016 and 2026, about 10% over that period. And along with increasing population, we're seeing an increasing rate of household growth as well. As your population ages and as family structures change, families tend to need more homes to meet their needs than they used to. Seniors now, where they used to have 4 people in a home, only have 2, and rates of divorce in different family structures mean that often a single family now needs 2 homes to meet their needs. So though we're expecting your population to grow by about 10% between 2016 and 2026, we're expecting your household demand to grow by 20%, which is a really large jump. So keeping that in mind, that your household need often exceeds your rate of population growth. And as I mentioned, you are seeing your residents aging. We would expect that by 2026, which is the graph on the far right, you would have about 29% of your community being over the age of 65. That compares to 16% 20 years earlier. So all of those people in that sort of 25 to 64 category are getting older, getting closer to retirement, and that means they're going to start to need housing that suits their needs, and that their needs are going to change. Many of the older residents we spoke to were really worried about their ability to maintain larger properties, but could not downsize because of the cost or availability. And for us, it really highlights that need for affordable, accessible housing, particularly rental housing. As people get older, they live on fixed incomes and they're maybe unlikely to be able to purchase a newer sort of townhome or smaller version. They're looking to rent. Also highlights a need for home care and semi-supported or supported living options. And then lastly, housing that's closer to amenities and services. Driving your vehicle becomes less and less feasible as you get older. So siting new housing closer to those, the downtown core, and to those service centers that you do have is really important. Ways for you to move forward as a local government: land use decisions that prioritize multi-unit housing, and active/public transportation. I know that public transportation is a tough one in the TNRD, but where you do have active transportation availability, highlighting allowing the construction or prioritizing the construction or permitting of multi-unit housing along those corridors is really important. And also smaller units. The seniors that we spoke to tended to say that they didn't want less bedrooms. They still wanted 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms at least, but they wanted more manageable units, maybe with a maybe with a little bit of outdoor space, but they didn't want a full garden, or they want to mow the lawn and they didn't want to shovel snow, is basically what it comes down to. And this next graph is really interesting. This is showing that your rates of rentership are increasing almost across the board, but in particular, there's certain age cohorts where rates of rentership are increasing. And the blue bars there represent 2006 rates of rentership, and the gold bars represent 2016. And the places where we saw the highest jumps were in families with school-aged children. So in these sort of 0 to 20 age categories, and in the 25 to about 50 age categories. That's where the biggest jumps in rates of rentership are. So it's more families renting at increasingly expensive rates. And we are also finding that renters are less able to meet their needs than owners are. Partially that's because the median owner income is about $80,000 a year, and the median renter income is only about $37,000 per year. So a really big gap between the earning power and therefore the purchasing power of owners and renters. And that gap is becoming increasingly difficult to jump. And I'll show you why on the next slide here. So yeah, not only does it affect the ability of people to meet their housing needs, but it's also affecting employers in your community. They're telling us that it's not just tourism and retail, which we often associate with high rates of rentership. It's construction, it's teachers, it's healthcare aides, it's nurses. It's even, we spoke to municipal workers who are telling us that it is getting really difficult to work even at a job where you have to have a really good education and still meet your needs on a single income. So again, the answer or the way forward for you as a local government is pretty similar to the way forward for you in addressing your seniors populations, with a couple of differences. More dedicated, affordable, and appropriate rental options, and looking at especially rental options for housing for families and individuals, prioritizing those purpose-built rentals, looking at how to expand your suites and infill permissions, protecting the existing stock where you can, and looking at ways to improve that existing stock, either through co-investment opportunities through CMHC or other sort of agencies that can help you renovate stock rather than get rid of it. And so as I mentioned, that jump is getting harder to make, and this is why. This charts adjusted for inflation housing ownership prices in the city of Merritt from 2010 to 2009. And you can kind of see that it was pretty stable and actually declining until about 2014. But over the past 6 years for which we have data, you've seen a really steady increase in the rates of housing price, highlighted by your single detached homes, which are up 16%. And that may not seem like a lot, but keep in mind this is adjusted for inflation. And the single detached home market is so much larger than all of the other markets. We're often surprised when we see quite large jumps in prices. That's because, for every $1 million home that gets sold, there are often 3 or 4 sort of more rundown $250,000 homes that get sold. So there's so much stock that the prices tend to balance themselves out. So when we're seeing an increase, that is usually meaning a pretty direct impact on the pocketbooks of consumers and those who are trying to enter the market. So on one hand, you've got rates of rentership that are going up, you've got costs of renting that are going up, you've got availability of rentals going down, and you've got an ownership market that is becoming more expensive and harder to enter with more competition. And this really manifested, so it's not just renters, it's not just owners, it's both. 34% of all of our survey respondents indicated that their current housing was unaffordable. 65% of renter respondents indicated that their current housing was unaffordable. And when we asked people to tell us what they thought was going to be a worry for them in the next 5 years, it was the cost of maintaining the home, the physical ability to maintain the home, distance to service and amenities, stability of housing, so worried about their rental unit disappearing from underneath them. And then a big one was just the plain old cost of housing. And for us, this really highlights that need for non-market, supportive, and in some cases, emergency housing options. Merritt has the most applicants to BC Housing within the study area. Obviously, nothing compared to what you would see in Kamloops. But for a community of your size, it does have a fairly substantial application rate to BC Housing. We saw increased rates of people living or staying with family and friends. We often call that hidden homelessness, so folks that would not necessarily categorize themselves as homeless, but for most our intents and purposes are technically homeless. We saw many respondents reporting unsafe housing, poor housing conditions, and what really came out was a general increase in stress and worry related to housing insecurity. And Merritt really is the service hub for this sort of portion of the region, and it experiences higher rates of supported and emergency housing needs. And I think you as council obviously know that about your community, but it really did come through in the data how important that housing for vulnerable residents was, and housing that includes those wraparound supports. Again, highlighting a need for dedicated, affordable, and appropriate rental options. Looking at some alternative tenure models as well. Often we call that type of housing, that non-market housing, as we call it secured affordable housing, often secured through a long-term housing agreement or through a different type of agreement that's handed down from senior government. And really, for this type of housing, there's only so much that you as a local government can do. A lot of what needs to happen needs to come down from the senior levels of government in terms of increased funding. You can do a lot as wheel greasers, as connectors, as folks who can help make land available and who can make the development of that land easier and cheaper for non-market operators. But truly, the thing that makes it the cheapest is those long-term ongoing operating subsidies, grant funding, and low interest loans from organizations like BC Housing. That's really the key to getting this type of housing developed at a greater scale. So again, there's only a few things that you can do, but those things are incredibly important. A big one is educating your community to reduce stigma around affordable and supported uses. It is absolutely critical, and it's something that you are best positioned to do. And I know that it's not easy, and I know that it is controversial, but it is something that you can do as a local government that is very tangible, and it does have a major impact. Speaking on behalf of people who build nonprofit housing, when we go into a community that has its priorities straight, that has made this type of housing something that they care about, and that has done the work to educate their community, it really works so much better and so much easier, and it actually ends up being cheaper for your residents in our buildings because we're spending less money on the front end. And there's lots of other stuff too. If we want to go into that, as maybe if you've got questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. Or we can even, hopefully we'll have a session with staff where we can go over some of those things as well. So the last thing I'll leave you with is just some rates of housing need across different housing types in your community and across the region. So this is for the TNRD as a whole. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get this type of specific data for Merritt. It's just one of those things where the data limitations are too high. But this should give you a really good idea of who's struggling the most in your community. So this is core housing need across specific household types. We've got total core housing need on the far left, which shows that about 13% of households in the TNRD were in core housing need, 23% of Indigenous households in core housing need. And then you can see that families with or without children tend to have the lowest rates of core housing need. That's because these households tend to have two incomes. And more often than not, when they do have two incomes, one of the adults in the household is staying home and enabling the other adult to reach a much higher earning potential in their career. The people who are struggling the most are quite obviously lone parents. They have the added cost of caring for children. Typically, they have the added cost of childcare, and they have the added housing burden of needing to provide housing for themselves and for their children, all on one income. So the rates of lone parent housing need are very high, over 30% across the region, and over 50% for Indigenous households. And the other group to look at is singles and or roommates. Typically, these are your oldest residents and your youngest residents, those who are either just starting out in their careers and are on their own, or who have are now living on their own and have had their family, move out, things like that. So again, rates of core housing need about 20% or about 30% for Indigenous households. So these are some places and some individuals in your community that you can start to prioritize. Difficult to prioritize them through policy, but groups that you can listen to a little harder when you're going out and trying to do some engagement and making some housing decisions. Listening to these groups is a really important place to start. And so that's it for our key findings. The next steps in this study is, I believe you've got a resolution on your agenda for tonight. You've also required to post this housing needs report on your website. And in the next couple of months, we're hoping to host a staff training session. You are required by the Local Government Act to repeat this study every 5 years. Our recommendation is actually to repeat it a little earlier. The 2021 census will be released around 2022 or 2023. So our suggestion is to get on a cycle where as soon as that census data is released, that's when you're conducting your 5-year update. And then we're going to actually talk to staff and we'll train them how to do that next report to hopefully reduce your costs on the next round. And then lastly, a community forum. And we're sort of waiting to do both of those until we can meet safely in person. And if we can't meet safely in person in the next few months, then we'll have to conduct them online somehow. But we'll keep you updated and we'll pass along any information via Dawn and your staff. And that's it. Lastly, we'll say thank you to all of the amazing people that helped with this study. The stakeholders that we spoke to were incredibly generous with their time in a very trying period. And truly thank you to Regina and Alex at the Regional District, and of course Don at the City of Merritt for his really truly a great review of the report. And I think his dedication to reviewing the report has made your report one of the best that we were able to complete in this study. We're really proud of it. That's it. Perfect. So I think if you've got time, I'm happy to take any questions you've got. I appreciate that we might not have a ton of time. So if it's easier, my email is on the screen and you can get it from Dawn. I'm happy to take any questions you've got via email if that's more feasible for your agenda tonight. I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah, Mayor Brown, I'm still here. Yeah, sure. I can speak to that a little bit. Oh, there we go. So one thing I will say is that the staff training is pretty explicit on Our goal with that training is to get staff the information and ability to update the data and engagement sections of this report. It's not necessarily going to be about digging into those recommendations pieces. But if that's something you're interested in, I'm happy to forward a number of resources on to Dawn. There are some really great packages that people have put together on reducing stigma around affordable and supported uses in communities. Yeah, I think that it is, it's certainly not something that's easy. And I think that it will again need to be, it's something that is like, it's not even that it's not easy, it's that it doesn't stop, right? You don't get to win either. It's one of those things where someone, when we were working in Nelson, described it as, it's like shoveling the snow. You put it in your budget every year and you go out and you do it, and you just commit to doing it every year, and it becomes part of your culture more so than a single program or a single policy. So it's more about using the opportunity of maybe a project coming to you or being proposed to then commit some resources to helping the proponent go out and do that information gathering and that collection, and having maybe preparing some guides on the value of affordable housing, those sorts of things. So happy to prepare some material for you and to pass that along through Dawn, because I think it is a really valuable place for you to be starting your work on affordable housing. Not that you already aren't, but adjusting and going deeply in affordable housing. Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Councillor White. I can probably explain a little bit about that at this point. I won't go into too much detail, but generally, when we talk about non-market housing, it's a broad category that encompasses emergency shelter housing, short-term supportive housing, long-term supported housing, and subsidized rental housing. Those are sort of the four categories. What's most common is subsidized rental housing. So that is rental housing that is offered at an affordable rate, often through a government program like Rent Geared to Income, where the rental rate is set at 30% of the occupant's income, and typically there's annual income testing, or at the sort of shelter rate of income assistance, which is usually about $375 a month. So for folks who are on income assistance but do not need supportive elements in their housing, this would be a room that is available to them at that figure. As well, there's something called affordable housing, which is often set at 80% of the median income, or 30% of 80% of the median income of the area. So there's very, very different definitions for what affordable housing is and what that subsidized rental area is. And that can be really challenging to navigate as folks who are trying to be very clear and concise with your messaging to your constituents. So I often say there is there's affordable housing, and then there's supported housing, and drawing a very clear line between the two, I think it really helps for getting people on board with that affordable housing piece. It's more difficult to get people on board with the supported housing piece. That's where we find there's much more community pushback, and that is a bigger conversation to have, I think, and something that you have to be more strategic about when going out to your community members. But if you are a proponent coming with a project that is supported to address a very specific need, which we've I think really very clearly supported to address a very specific need, which we've I think really very clearly, then it really helps to have a staff that's informed about who is going to be coming out in your community to talk about it, what are the circumstances and the context surrounding this project, and working with that developer, that usually it's a nonprofit operator, to make sure they understand the context and are able to communicate the context effectively to your community members. So yeah, I don't know if it's certainly a shortened version of a very long conversation that we could have, but hopefully that begins to sort of give you some idea of where that split is.
Thank you. Councillor Christopherson. Oh, did you want to help respond to that? Okay.
And thanks, Mr. Mackay, for that description. That was great. Just as an add-on to that, on page 20 of the report, there's a great description of the difference between the housing continuum and the wheelhouse, which are two different models of the spectrum of the different types of affordable housing that exists. So that's probably very useful for residents as well.
Councillor Christopherson.
Good, thank you. Just responding a bit to the idea of reducing the stigma of various types of housing, I think it would be probably more profitable for us to look at promoting what the value to the community is, because I think we all benefit from having different housing options available to us, and I think sometimes people forget that there are real advantages to a community of having different options available, whether it's as a senior wanting to downsize, or whether it's younger people wanting to come to Merritt to work and they can't because there's no housing. So I think the community really needs to, I think we need to promote in the community that there's a lot of value to having different types of housing options available to us. Thank you.
Councillor Luck.
Well, Sandy, thank you very much for the report. I'm just fascinated by it. I've been a proponent of affordable housing for quite a while, especially since elected and on this council, and recognizing the need for affordable housing, and that's the full spectrum, everything from subsidized and market and all the way down to market housing. We're in a housing crisis in this community and the whole province. So this report is very, very timely, and I really appreciate the comments that you have made and the things that we need to be looking at and doing in the community. Education's a huge piece of that, I think, and being able to educate the public here about the need for affordable housing in our community is very, very important. It just so happened the other night I couldn't sleep, so I woke up and started scanning the internet, and I found this amazing article by Maya Russell, Let's Make Way for Homes We Need in British Columbia. She cuts right to the chase. She says, I'm sick and tired of the crap that goes on. We pay a lot of lip service to affordable housing, not only the public, but the politicians do as well. They're all easy to back down on this, and I think it's going to be very, very important moving forward that we need to look at housing at a really broader vision in our community. I know it's very, very hard. It's a very difficult thing to do because it's disruptive. There's no question about that to some neighborhoods. But we're really going to have to find that education piece in there and just get people to look at the different issues and find out how we can do that. One of the, and of course, as you know, immigration and all the things that are happening in this country, as we make room for more people, it becomes more of a challenge. Sandy, one of the biggest problems that I've identified some time ago, and others as well, is that one of the biggest problems to affordability is land availability. As you know, and you're probably aware of, that in our provinces, we have less than 5% of the property available for housing in this province, for private ownership, meaning all types of housing, businesses, everything. And that's a really challenge. And you identified in your report as well that one of the biggest impediment to some of this is big government. How do we work with government to free up some more land and get some more land available for housing? Kamloops is up against it. They're running out of land. Kelowna is running out of land. We're running out of land. All these communities are really having a challenge. So we only have one way to go, and that's higher densities. So I'm just wondering, Sandy, if you've been able to identify any ways that we can work with the provincial government to get more land available for us for housing.
Sure.
And in that, perhaps help us along with our North Bench development? Yeah.
Oh, that's a nice segue.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question, or did Sandy want to answer that? Oh, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, it is a great question. And one of those things where, again, I don't have a good answer for you. I've got a long-winded answer that won't leave you with any satisfying results. But I think one place that you can start is to maximize the ability of the land that you already have available. I know that that is not as great as just acquiring new land and building it, but when you do have land available, um, putting into effect, even now, a land acquisition and disposal plan, looking at acquiring land for the purposes of affordable housing when you can, so distressed properties or undervalued properties, and then prioritizing disposal to nonprofit operators who are committed to operating perpetually affordable housing in your community. That's one way to do it. The other way is to look at that gentle densification. I know that a place like Merritt, it's got its own character, and it's got neighborhoods that are established, and you don't want to go disrupting those types of neighborhoods too much. But there are ways to gently increase the density and availability of rental units in that secondary market. So those are units that are typically rented out in someone's home. Or infill units where you're looking at, what was maybe once a large single family lot becomes a triplex. That's still only 2 stories, and it fits within the character of the neighborhood. So those types of decisions can be really helpful using the assets that you already have. But in terms of the going up the chain piece and acquiring more land, or having the ability to acquire land from the provincial government, the big piece is advocacy. We tend to break down the roles and abilities of local government into 5 key categories: regulation, incentivization, partnership, education, and advocacy. And advocacy is the one that often gets overlooked. But it's about getting together with communities that are of a similar size to you, that are in a similar position to you, at things like UBCM, at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and coming with one single message. This is a concern for us, and we need these tools at the local government level in order to do it. So using those channels that already exist to prepare that message and to bring it forcefully and with one voice is really effective. And then there's also things that you can do, like memorandums of understanding with the provincial government. There's some communities that have done those. Using your time at events like UBCM, often you're given that sort of ability to have a one-on-one with the ministers or with the premier, using that time to talk about a specific project in your community that maybe you or a specific need in your community that you want to highlight. The decisions on where funding gets allocated are, they are done through this very rigorous decision-making process that has many pieces that go into evaluating projects. But it is a political decision as well. And so if you can say, this is our priority as a local government, and we'd like you to make it your priority, that can go a long way towards securing some of that senior level funding for you. It's a lot. I know, but it's really effective to have you folks on council as dedicated advocates, and it helps to be able to direct your staff to put some of their resources to this as well. They're obviously really busy, and there's not a huge staff there at the City of Merritt, but looking at maybe it is 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week, or maybe you are bringing on a part-time FTE to fulfill some of this role. If it's something that you prioritize at the council level, it will filter down. And the culture of your community is important, and the culture of your community starts with you as its elected representatives, and you can start to change that. Without any money and without any resources, you can change that culture.
Councillor Etchart.
Thank you. I was just wondering if with the housing needs assessment, we can use this to help possible investors use this to partner with CMHC to build or work on a plan for supporting housing or non-market units, because I know that in the past there had been some of the seniors housing developments, or at least one that I know of, that had been a project with CMHC, and what maybe current incentives are, or if there's anything we can do to partner with these investors to go to CMHC to encourage some development, or maybe even there's some existing lots within the downtown or other areas where we can incentivize to promote maybe affordable housing, just as a suggestion.
Councillor Echard, I'm happy to just respond quickly to that. 100% you can use this document for that. That's expressly what it's designed for. 100%. I work in the community planning division, but most of our office is employed in nonprofit development services. And before we send these documents out, they read them for exactly that purpose. Does this document help a nonprofit developer build something in your community? And one of the first things that we always look for is a distinct and clear need, and that's what this document is designed to do, to give you that very first piece. It'll help with your seed applications, which is when nonprofits go to CMHC for preliminary funding where they can do more due diligence on a property or on a site. It helps with your applications through the things like the Community Housing Fund call, which just closed, and it helps for applications through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. That's absolutely what this document is for, and it's one of many tools, but it's a good start, and I think it's great that you're thinking about that as a sort of mechanism that you can take as a council and as a community. I really like that as a next step.
Any other comments, questions? Any other comments? Well, Mr. McKay, thank you. You mentioned that we didn't have a huge staff, but I just want to reiterate that we may not have a huge staff, but we have a great staff. So thank you to staff and all the community members that also participated in the study. And thank you, Mr. McKay, for putting it together, and it's a great document, and it will help us move forward. So thank you very much. Mr. MacArthur.
And Your Worship, just before we move on, we do also need the two resolutions, one to receive the report and the other to direct staff to publish it.
Thank you for the reminder. I was ready to move on. So I need a mover that council receive the housing needs report as per section 585.31 of the Local Government Act. And a seconder. And anyone want to speak to this? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. We also need a mover that council direct staff to publish the housing needs report on the city website as per section 585.4 of the Local Government Act. And seconder? Okay, one of you. And any comments here? All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Thank you. We're moving on to our bylaws. Actually, Mr. Vieira, are you actually going back to Kamloops tonight? I am. Would anyone mind if we pushed this new business 8.1 up on the agenda so that Jamie can actually get out of here faster than 4 hours from now?
We need a resolution for that, Mr. Smith?
Miss? Yeah. Agenda? Okay, can I have, so moved? Second? Okay, and so we are moving item number 8.1 up before bylaws. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Vieira, you're on instead of having to wait through an entire financial budget. Yeah. And you'll need your mic. And Mr. Smith, were you going to at least introduce, or now that I've already?
Absolutely can do that.
Yeah, the roads are kind of ugly tonight. You may need that extra time.
First off, thank you so much to Jamie for being here today. He reached out some time ago regarding the invasive plant program that the TNRD runs, or is looking to get up and running, which would really see kind of a cross-coordinated effort across all of the municipalities and electoral areas in the region to be able to address those invasive plant species that honestly, some years we don't hear about it a lot, but last year we had it come up a lot with our residents' concerns around particular invasive plants. Burdock thistle came up quite a bit in particular. And so this is something that when the TNRD kind of heard that there was a need out there, they looked at designing up a program, and certainly I think it's an intriguing proposal and something that we were excited to have the TNRD come out and present for you. So thanks for coming, Jamie.
Thank you.
All right, so are you my clicker, or do I have a clicker?
I've got it, I don't think it has a battery.
I'll click through for you.
All right, well, then I shouldn't have had animations, because I'll get you to click lots, but that's fine. Thanks for having me, thanks for the introduction, Sean. So, yeah, as Sean mentioned, the purpose, I'll kind of clarify right off the bat sort of what I'm here proposing. So I believe this proposal is in your agenda package. So this presentation you're seeing is basically just a summary of that. I mean, I'm happy to share the presentation, but the same information is contained in this proposal. So what we're proposing here, or what I'm presenting, is an opportunity for municipalities to opt in to the existing TNRD invasive plant service, and I'll explain what that service is in a minute. So what it's, you can click forward here. So the way we do that is we amend the existing service establishment bylaw this year, and then any municipality that wants to opt in will be able to opt in, and then the following year, 2022, we'll start paying into the service part of the TNRD services that they opt into, similar to libraries and solid waste and whatnot. And then they'll start receiving those benefits in 2022. So just to clarify again, because I've been asked this question a few times, this is not sort of a one-time ask for funding. It's an opportunity to join the service. Once you're in the service on an ongoing basis. Again, like the library system, for example. So what's the issue? Why are we bringing this up, and why are we coming to municipalities now? So this is the, I think, sixth council meeting we presented at, so we're actually going to have them kind of all knocked off by the end of March. And they've all received the same proposal and the same presentation. And what the issue is, it seems to be uniform across all municipalities in the TNRD. I mean, the main concern is weeds don't follow boundaries on a map. It'd be really easy if they did, if they just stopped at municipal boundaries and didn't come in, but that's not the case. So you can click forward through in the next 3 bullets, actually. Yeah, you can leave it there. Good. So we're seeing invasive plant issues in more urban and semi-urban areas, and as Sean mentioned, I know specifically in Merritt, there's concerns, and I'll show you in a minute, there's legitimate concerns because there is infestations here. More and more landowners within municipalities are calling us, asking for help, and when it comes to one aspect of our program I'll talk about, our landowner assistance program, they're wanting to take advantage of sort of the funding that we have available to rural area residents, but we're having to decline them because saying, sorry, you don't participate in this program, so you can't receive these benefits at this time. Separate to that, we're also having more and more municipal staff from different municipalities calling us, knocking our door, asking for help managing weeds on their own land, like city-owned land, for example, parks and boulevards, that sort of thing. And municipal staff, especially in small towns, often don't have those expertise. So, but before I talk more specifically about what our program is, I guess, for lack of a better word, I'm just going to scare you a bit by giving you a couple examples of the invasive plants that are out there that we're currently sort of tackling. So the first one is Japanese knotweed. So Japanese knotweed is one that is, well, I'll say right off the bat, there's a number of sites already that we know about in Merritt and throughout the TNRD. This plant is not widespread yet in the TNRD, but it is widespread in the coastal areas, especially kind of the sea to sky corridor, Squamish and that area. It's been long established in the United Kingdom, and it's so bad there now that there's issues in the United Kingdom where people can't get mortgages on properties where this is established. And you know, this first picture here, you can see why. Once those roots, once one plant's growing, it could grow through concrete, grows through asphalt, grows through housing foundations. I click the next picture, grows right into the home. We had an issue within the municipality of Clearwater. One of the, it was a small local hotel there, had to replace their septic system, and they didn't know why it failed, but when they dug it up, they realized it was completely infested with knotweed, and that was the reason for the failure. So real tangible, you know, that was the cost of that landowner from this plant. So within Merritt, we have 3 sites that have been reported. Now this data is from the provincial database. So no one's out, I shouldn't say no one's active. I was gonna say no one's actively looking. We are actively looking sometimes, but more or less we rely on reports to add these weeds into the database. So if there's 3 sites that we know about in Merritt, there's probably more than 3. Yeah, I'll leave that one for now and we could move on to the next plant. Another example, giant hogweed. Now luckily we don't have that one within the TNRD yet, but it is widespread through the Fraser Valley, so just over that hill there. This one actually, it's different in that it's not a concern so much of infrastructure or agriculture, but it's really toxic to human health. So it actually, the sap of the plant causes burns. You can actually get up to 3rd-degree burns from the sap of this plant. So it's especially a problem in parks and recreation areas. I have a bulletin here from WorkSafe BC of how to handle it because it's been identified as a serious problem to them as well. Next one, and just the third example, and you know, there's you know, we could talk all day about different invasive plants, but I just chose these 3. Blueweed is the third one. Now blueweed, you'll probably recognize those pictures. It is widespread throughout the Nicola Valley, especially sort of the lower Nicola area. It spreads quickly on roadsides. It definitely impacts forage value from the agriculture sector. It impacts biodiversity because it outcompetes native vegetation, and yeah, it's an aesthetics problem as well. Increases erosion. So similar to a lot of the sort of grassland weed species, similar to knapweed, blueweed is sort of the, if you will, I don't want to say up and comer because it's been established here a long time, but the thing about blueweed is it's not widespread throughout the southern interior yet like knapweed is. It's actually somewhat localized to pockets within the interior. Now, Merritt and Lower Nicola is kind of the hotbed of it. So you actually can go to the next slide. So the first photo there on the left-hand side is a map sort of further back, kind of showing the whole Nicola Valley area, and the green dots are the identified sites that we're managing. And those are mostly on Crown land, so along highways and forestry, that forest jurisdiction that they're being managed. But that circle around, or the boundary there is what we call our containment line. So we're trying to treat all those weeds, but most aggressively keeping them from going beyond those boundaries. And as you can see, you know, Merritt's on the edge and within that containment area. So what I'll talk about in a moment is the blueweed that's on private land within that containment area. We have some incentive to assist those landowners to treat that land. Within Merritt, they can't access those same programs, which is what I'll talk about in a minute. But one more thing before I move on away from the slide. The photo to the right of the purple there, that's the city of Merritt boundaries. And what I wanted to highlight here, just to kind of keep in your mind, and obviously I don't need to tell you guys, you know your city better than I do, but specific to Merritt, there is a lot of sort of rural and semi-rural property within the municipal boundaries. So, which is slightly different than a lot of the other municipalities I've been talking to that, you know, only have sort of city-side slots. There is a lot of agricultural land right within your city boundaries. All right, to the next slide, please. So what is our invasive plant program? So I'm just going to highlight on it again. It's all in this proposal. But there's 3 components, the way I explain it to people. Landowner assistance program, regional coordination, education and outreach. So landowner assistance is our biggest budget and kind of the most well-known high-profile aspects of what we do. So financial assistance is what I mentioned. We spend over $100,000 a year, which we essentially just pay directly out to private landowners in the form of rebates for them to treat weeds on their own property. So there's a application process where basically, as long as it's a weed off our invasive plant list, they hire a contractor, get it treated, they submit the rebate. Depending on the weed species, they either receive a 50% rebate or a 100% rebate if it's a new invader species. There's also equipment loan out, so for those people who have kind of experience doing treatment themselves, they can borrow equipment free of charge. That's usually more for the rural agricultural properties, but you do have some of those within Merritt. We do in-person weed assessments and recommendations, so sometimes it's hard to help someone over the phone when they're trying to explain what a weed looks like and trying to ask how to treat it. Sometimes it is fairly simple to send a photo, but other times with someone, especially, for example, a new landowner that comes to, buys a small acreage and they want, they may be from a different area from the Lower Mainland, they're not familiar with interior plants and weeds, we can help them sort of establish a weed control plan, understand what, what's a good plant and what's not a good plant. And we also have a biocontrol program. So biological control, what it involves on our end is, so the province has for the last 30 years introduced, or 40 years actually, introduced specific insect species that attack invasive plants. Now there's only insects for a handful of plants, that they've been introduced, but it's always, the term that's always used is it's a tool. It's another tool in the toolbox. So where we have those insects, what we do is we collect them and redistribute them on private land. So for example, knapweed insects, they're widespread throughout the interior, but if there's a small parcel of land and a riparian area where you can't use any herbicides, one thing we could do is collect bugs to kind of boost that population of those insects along that riverbank. I will clarify, because sometimes people find this, they jump to conclusions thinking, oh great, the bugs will kill all the weeds in 1 year. Well, no, that's not how it works, but what they will do is they'll reduce the amount of seeds they produce and prevent further spread. So it may not ever even kill that infestation, but prevent or slow the spread of it outward. Regional coordination, so this is a role of, so we facilitate what's called the Thompson-Nicoll Invasive Plant Management Committee. Now we have a little logo there. Now it is a committee of the TNRD board, but we do refer to it sort of as a bit of a separate entity because we have participation from all sorts of land managers. So yes, we meet in the TNRD office and sort of staff, our TNRD staff do most of the work that comes out of that. But in addition to 3 TNRD board directors, we have staff from Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Forests, First Nation representation, cattlemen's representation, environmental stewardship organizations on there. So the idea is anyone with a sort of a stake, I shouldn't say everyone, but we're trying to get a good representation of it, anyone who's doing land management within the TNRD, so we're doing a coordinated approach. Because, if you're doing something on your side of the fence, you want someone on the other side of the fence to be kind of doing the same thing and caring about the same plants and using their resources efficiently. And finally, education and outreach. So we have a component of our program where both our own staff and we actually have contract consultants as well who do our education outreach programs in schools, in community community home shows and things like that. CD Saturdays, we often go to those. Farmers markets, that sort of thing. Obviously last year it was a little different, more virtual type things, but going back to that map I showed you of, or referring to the map of knotweed, there's 3 knotweed infestations we know about. How many people have it in their yard growing and don't really realize that, and how long do they spread to their neighbors. So education is key. So let's get to the numbers, so the financial impacts. Last year, about for the last 5 years or so, these numbers have been fairly consistent. We collect about $350,000 a year in taxation. Now, to clarify, the current format is all 10 electoral areas participate in this service, and none of the municipalities. So this is just collect taxation from those 10 areas. Plus, we receive about $50,000 a year in provincial grants. Now, before I go further, I just want to clarify, though, that the grant money does have strings attached, and that grant money can only be used for that coordination and education sort of function. So the role of the TNI PMC as well as the kind of the education function that comes out of it. So all of those rebates that we pay out directly to the landowners comes only from that taxation. Hence why, you know, we can't issue rebates to properties within municipalities. So what we did here, and I'm assuming there'll be questions about this, I'll try sort of at least start answering those questions, is, you know, how we came up with the numbers in this proposal. And I guess I'll start by explaining what we didn't do. So what we didn't do is, or what we quickly decided wouldn't work, is the conventional model for a region-wide service. The conventional model is based on converted assessment, is how the participating communities pay into it. So if you look at a region-wide service like libraries, for example, the lion's share, 60% or something like that, gets paid by the city of Kamloops. Merritt has the next biggest chunk, and so on. So municipalities end up paying the lion's share of the service, and the electoral area is a lot smaller because there's simply not as much assessment. So I'm not going to stand here trying to suggest that, you know, municipalities are going to use the service as much as the rural areas, and that's why we need to kind of think outside the box here. So what we're proposing is we basically work backwards. We thought, okay, well, if we add municipalities, let's say all the municipalities opt in, which I should clarify right now, this isn't contingent on all municipalities opting in. Each municipality can individually make their decision. But we came up with a number of, if they all opt in, how much is our budget going to increase? How much more rebates do we think we're going to issue? How many more staff capacity do we need to have to deliver the education programs, et cetera? And then we took that number and then divided that among municipalities. And then we came up with these 4 categories of municipalities. We grouped them by population, so the under 1,000, the between 1,000 and 5,000, the between 5,000 and 50, and 50 and above. So as you see, Merritt obviously fits in there at the 5 to 50,000 mark. And then, you know, people usually get hung up on the third column there with the total cost. You know, that's our starting point for 2022. But the way the bylaw would be set up is that it would actually be the percentage of the budget. So whatever the total budget approved by the TNRD board is for the service that year, the maximum percentage that those municipalities would pay is set in that bylaw. So, you know, I mentioned that, you know, last year was roughly 400,000. If it went up or down, that percentage would, you know, the total amount that contributed by the cities would go up and down the same. So the column 3 there with the $20,000 proposed for Merritt, that's based on us increasing our budget by about $150,000 next year if all those different municipalities would opt in, and that's where that $20,000 came from. But the bylaw would say the 4.5%. All right, next slide. So next steps. So if council is interested in moving forward on this, what we'd require is a council resolution. I can send a draft resolution to staff. And basically that would just show the TNRDs, or show TNRD board that there's intent from the municipality to opt in. Then we'd bring the amended bylaw to the TNRD board to consider. They would adopt the amended bylaw. Then council would need to then do a second formal resolution just adopting that new bylaw that has them included in it. And as I said, the service and the taxation wouldn't start until 2022. Now, I'm not the finance guy, but I'm think I have my head wrapped around the way this works. Just to clarify, when I say taxation starts, again, the service would be lumped in with the TNRD taxation. So individual City of Merritt residents wouldn't see weed control. It would just be the portion that they pay to the TNRD that's on their tax notice that this $20,000 or so would be added into. And I think there's one more slide there. Yeah, so just a summary, benefits to the city to kind of recap, stable long-term program, financial assistance to residents, support for municipal staff, enhanced regional coordination, increased education awareness, and we're protecting our land values.
Excuse me.
And I'll stop there and take questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Vieira? Councillor Luck.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question, clarity again, we opt in, but once we're in for life? Is that what I understood there?
Almost. Someone else asked that question, so I had to look into it. So
Okay, yeah.
there is a mechanism for opting out of the service, so it's essentially the same way as getting into the service. So to opt out of the service, the municipality would show intent, it would go to the TNRD board, and it would have to be a 2/3 vote, I think, of those that are included within the service to allow the municipality to leave the service. So there is a mechanism for that.
Yeah, just wanted clarity to
Yeah.
go on in. Thank you.
I have a question. Would we have input into the budget process? If we only look at 4.5% and you decide to increase your staff by 10,
As a, the city council would not have direct, well, input, yes, I guess. Let me back up. That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. So input from sort of a consultation point, yes, we'd be happy to sort of take input, notify you of sort of what things are happening, talk to staff saying this is what we're proposing, especially if there's obviously going to be a big change. The formal process for adopting the budget, though, would be the same as any other TNRD budget, so it would go to the TNRD board. So
which we still have input
the
in.
city has input from a vote there as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? And I have one for staff. We weren't going to do a resolution tonight. Are we going to have a staff report for this? Mr. Smith?
Your worship, it's not typical for us to do resolutions
Right.
on the spot. That being said, I've just heard from councils previously that you like the opportunity to mull it over and talk about it at a future meeting. So we'll include this as an item on the next agenda is one potential way of dealing with this, and it's,
Okay,
I think
Thank
that
you.
would be best.
so I think that concludes our questions. And I was going to say too, I've had, Jamie came here because he presented to TNRD and I went, this is it. I've had a number of calls from the community members to say they had burdock, they have whatever other weeds have been around. And we don't have a program internally. And a lot of our staff, we're calling your staff to be told we can't do anything about it. I mean, and when you presented, it made sense to me to look at, because you were talking about a regionalized program, and I went, we're in. So it's nice to see this actually coming to this point. Now I've got questions. Councillor Etchart.
Well, I just appreciate all the information because I know from having lived in other places, even Sunshine Coast, seeing the mess that happens when you don't look after these plants and the cost to residents, just having seen from your presentation that it may be a cost, but what's the cost of not acting? And you've already mentioned a few of the streets where you've seen some activity already, and how fast that can spread is quite scary. So, and the damage, and so thanks for the info, or the nightmare. Thanks.
Mr. Smith?
I just wanted to give council a little bit of an idea as to how this might dovetail with our existing kind of bylaw enforcement program that we run. So council's familiar that we have a good neighbor bylaw that deals with unsightly premises, but it also addresses weeds. The problem is that our mechanism to actually require people to eradicate weeds in the way that this program would deal with. We don't, have the expertise or the ability to do it. If somebody's come in and weed whacked the heck out of that and all it's done is spread the seeds everywhere, we're a little bit more hamstrung. So if we have the ability to say, hey, here's a program, there's some potential financial assistance for you to be able to address this and deal with it the right way, it really gives us the ability to kind of approach enforcement in a more consistent way that doesn't feel really punitive on landowners. And so that's one of the advantages to it, is that we actually think that we'll be able to, with a program like this in place, to be able to provide a lot more education and information, but also direct people to a meaningful resource that may make it so we can run a better program internally without, bankrolling people.
And just before I go to Councillor Bangu, that was another reason, was you get a major grant every year that our landowners don't have access to at this point. They will have access to that grant if we opt in. So that was another perk for us to be able to join. Councillor Bangu.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. If I may ask, how were the numbers determined, the cost? For example, I think I read there, a population of 1 to 5,000 pays 10,000. A population 5 to 50,000 pays 20,000. I mean, we're a population of 7 to 8,000. And then you have a population of 40,000 plus paying 40,000. That seemed a little excessive for a population of 8. Thank you.
So, very good question, and I'll be pretty blunt. It's a bit of an educated guess. So I'll kind of repeat what I said before. What we did is tried to work backwards. So we ended up grouping them based on population, but that's not how we estimated. What we did is we looked at the communities and thought, okay, well, we'll take Kamloops for example. You mentioned them. How many properties in Kamloops, do we, based on our current rebates we're paying out to rural areas, how much we think we can spend within Kamloops? How many rebates do we think we'll get on an annual basis going forward? And we looked at somewhere like Merritt, and we looked at some smaller communities like Cache Creek and Lytton. Because you could also argue, and it's been suggested, that this should be done on geographic size too, not population. But so where we ended up, but we wanted to have some sort of structure to this proposal as well, and not have a tiny little percent difference between all these communities. So it was essentially an educated guess based on how much we thought it was going to cost, how much the budget would have to increase to support each community opting in, and that's where we ended up with those groupings. But at the end of the day, it is an educated guess, right? The lump sum of $40,000 for Kamloops is that's what the hope is. If we're completely out to lunch in our estimates, let's say they all opt in and we're way out to lunch and one community is drastically using up more of the budget, then yeah, I would have to come back to the TNRD board a bit with my tail between my legs and saying, our estimates were way off and we need to amend this bylaw to tweak it. But this is our starting point, was what we came up with. And I guess all I could say is it's as an educated of a guess as we're going to get at this point of the data we know.
And if I can add to that, the communities within TNRD, we've got the huge city of Kamloops, and Merritt is second. Everybody else is under 5,000. So we really have a big variance in population.
Still don't match, regardless of what you're
Well,
saying.
they wouldn't match. They couldn't match.
Sure. I mean, it's not reasonable, the numbers that are presented, if you want the data.
I did have some numbers actually I wanted to share that I missed, if I may. The surrounding electoral areas, to put in perspective here, so.
Sorry,
electoral areas-
Jamie, sorry, I just shut you off. I was trying to turn Councillor Bangu off.
There we go. Electoral area M and N, obviously smaller populations, but bigger geographic area. So the taxation contribution last year from electoral area M was 38,000, and the financial contribution from electoral area N was 31,000. And again, what we're proposing here is that the increased costs would be taken up by municipalities, so their contributions would stay the same. Their contributions wouldn't go down significantly by any other municipality opting in.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your presentation, and we will get back to you. Have a safe trip home. So we can now back up to 7.1, the 2020-2024 financial plan amendment. And Mr. Anderson, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. A couple of bylaws to go through here this evening. The first one is a bit of a housekeeping exercise to go through the amendments to the 2020-2024 financial plan that was approved on bylaw 2281-2020 on May 14th, 2020. So this bylaw here that we're bringing forward, 2303-2021, will replace the 2020-2024 financial plan that was presented in May of 2020. So there are 3 items on the report here that impact the 2020-2024 plan. The first one being the fire pumper tender. So the fire pumper tender was, there was a report back in August of 2019 to add $80,000 to the budget for 2020. Unfortunately, that was missed in the 2020 plan. So we're asking that that gets added on here. The 2020-2024 plan included $400,000, $300,000 of that to come from debt servicing and $100,000 from general revenue. So the $80,000 would bring it up to $480,000. The actual cost of the tender was $479,575. That is something that I'll bring forward here a little bit later when we get into MFA financing. So that's the first one. The second item that's added on here, back in June of 2020, there was a meeting with unanimous approval from Council to award the Fraser Basin Water Council $25,000 from our gas tax reserve to perform a groundwater study that they had put forward in on May 26, 2020. So that is the second amendment. The third amendment is the fact that we did receive we were successful in our grant application for flood hazard mapping funded through the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. So the third amendment here is to recognize that $150,000 in grant funding and the offsetting expense of $150,000. We have expensed $75,000 of that already in 2020, and when we receive the report later on this summer, we will expend the remaining $75,000 on that. So the recommendation is that City Council amend the bylaw 2303-2021 and read it 3 times.
Okay, and can I clarify? This is for the last year's budget, last year's financial statements.
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. This is for the 2020-2024 financial plan, okay, which was for last year's budget. So it's just a cleanup of the 2020 budget amounts. The net impact on the budget is about $25,000, which is that Fraser Basin one. The other ones are below the line, if you like, capital and reserve type transactions. So it is the 2020 plan.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, I will, I'll need a mover that City of Merritt 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw number 2303-2021 be read a first time. And anybody want to speak to this? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. I need a mover. City of Merritt 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw number 2303, 2021 be read a second time. And I need a seconder as well. Did I get a seconder for the first one? Okay. And anyone want to speak to this a second time? All in favor? Opposed? None carried. And a mover for that the City of Merritt. Your worship? Yeah. Oh, sorry, yes.
Could I just clarify for the record who the seconder was for the second reading? Councillor Fair? Okay. Thank you.
Do you actually record who it is? Because I can actually read it out or speak it. We've never recorded it before, but I can. Mr. Lois?
Thank you, Your Worship. Historically, no, but if you adopt the proposed procedure bylaw coming forth on March 9th, then we will be doing so as for a variety of reasons, including checksum to make sure that everything has been properly moved and seconded, because if we know who did it, we know it was done.
Okay, and I'm okay with stating the name then, because then I know it's done as well. Okay. Now, did anyone else have any? Did we finish first and second? We're now on third? Oh, all in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. And now we go to the third reading. Okay, I need a mover. Councillor White, Councillor Luck, that the City of Merritt 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw number 2303, 2021 be read a third time. Anybody want to speak to this? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. That's 1, 2, 3. And just a final question, Mr. Anderson. We're talking about the amendment being 2303, 2021, but it's a 2020 plan.
Yes, Mayor, that is the numbering system for 2021. We are in the bylaw cycle for 2021, even though it does relate to 2020. Okay. Mr. Lois provides those numbers, and 2021 it shall be.
Mr. Lois.
Your Worship, any bylaw which is introduced and read for the first time after January 1st of any given year will be numbered for that year, even if it refers to events in a prior year.
Yeah, it just got a little confusing repeating it. So, thank you. Where are we now? Okay, now we're looking at the capital budget, 7.2, and Mr. Anderson, are you?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the second bylaw that we're going over here tonight is the bylaw 2304-2021. And this one relates to the items that we talked about in the January 29th meeting, that there would be a few capital items that we wanted pre-approval on. We are bringing forward the 2021-2025 financial plan on the March 30th Committee of the Whole meeting, but this is just a pre-approval of 5 items in particular. We went through about 60 capital items in that meeting on January 29th, and some managers identified 5 of the projects that they would like pre-approval on. So to spend the money, we need a bylaw, and this bylaw will be incorporated into the financial plan that we bring forward for 2021-2025. So the 5 projects as listed here on the second page, there are a couple for the fire department, fire hall network switch and IT addition. As we build that expansion on the fire hall, we need a network in that building, and that's $8,000. Fire station furnishings, the $25,000 to equip the rooms and so forth with furnishings. Cemetery expansion, as we talked about in the meeting on the 29th, there is a need to expand that cemetery, and this is the cost for 2021, which is 50% of what the actual expansion would be over a 2-year time frame. We need additional plots and want to get working on that as soon as we can in the spring here. The Coldwater Trail repairs, bridge repairs, another $200,000 here. does require DFO and FL and RO approval, which is time sensitive or time intensive process here. So we need to get started on that as well. And then the SCADA computer upgrade for the wastewater treatment facility, which is a legislated requirement there. So the total of all five is $526,000 in capital. Those are all to be funded through general reserves that we have in place. All of the new reserve accounts that we talk about, they will be coming out of those accounts.
Thank you. And just to clarify, these are not new capital items that we're talking about. These are just items that need to be done immediately before we actually approve the budget process.
Yes, correct, Mayor. These are ones that we brought forward on the January 29th meeting, so there's nothing new on this list that you haven't already heard about in some level of detail, so these are ones that were brought forward.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Your worship, I did get news late this afternoon, and I think that there's one more item that we may need to add to this, and potentially that would require a bylaw amendment, likely at second reading. So I'm going to defer to our corporate office team there for that. That is that the pedestrian bridge project that we are hoping is going to be entirely grant funded. I heard news today that that may require the full authorization process that would require DFO approval as well. I've got a conversation we need to have on that front, but in the interest of us not being successful in that conversation, I think that getting early approval on that project as well would be something that we would need in order to have any chance at hitting the fish window. So.
Okay, thank you. So we need a motion first, okay.
We can do first and second reading, I think, or first reading, and then make the amendment at second reading time.
Okay. So we need a mover that council read the proposed 2021 capital budget, interim approved items by law 2304-2021 as presented a first time. Etchart, Luck. And anybody want to speak to this? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? None carried. Now, we need an amendment. We need a mover and second first and then an amendment, or we're going to move it as amended?
I've got an idea, but go for it if you want to. I don't want to step on toes. Okay, sounds good. Are you comfortable, or do you want me to just run with it? Okay, so what I think that you should do is that council amend at this point, so don't read it the second time, that council amend the 2021 capital budget interim approval items by law 2034-2021 by adding the Nicola pedestrian bridge project as an interim approval item.
Okay. And do we have a mover for that? Councillor Luck, Councillor Fair, second. Anyone want to speak to this? Councillor Etchart?
Was this the pedestrian bridge that had the cost of $81,000 attached to it that we were trying to get 100% grant funding for?
I love your memory. Exactly that project, yes.
Like I would forget a number.
That's the ticket.
Yeah, okay. Just rendering roughly-ish. Thanks.
One thing I will say that could happen is whether the budget would be $81,000 if we need to go through the approval process. There may be a budget amendment after the fact, but we're going to seek early authorization.
Yeah, this gives us the authority to be able to go ahead and start doing it. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor? Opposed, none, carried. So we now need motion number 3.
No,
that
still
also
second reading.
What?
Second reading, you
That
need
was-
to read it. That was just the amendment. And now you need to read the bylaw as amended a second time.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize that's what we did. I need a mover that council read the proposed 2021 capital budget interim approved items by law 2304-2021 with the addition of the Nicola pedestrian bridge project as presented a second time. White and Etchart, I think. And anyone want to speak to the full now? All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. So the third one also includes the with the addition of the nickel. Okay. So I need a mover that council read the proposed 2021 capital budget interim approval items bylaw 2304-2021 with the addition of the Nicola pedestrian bridge project as presented a third time. Etchart, White, and anyone want to speak to this? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, none. So that was Etchart and White. So now we're moving on to new business again, 8.2, Fall Fair Rodeo Grounds. And Mr. Lois, are you going to take this over? Okay. Ms. Brick?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the proposed resolution for item 8.2 would authorize the city to enter into an agreement with the Nicola Valley Fall Fair Association, the Nicola Valley Rodeo Association, and the TNRD, and it would also authorize staff to expend the required funds to meet the obligations of the agreement. The TNRD will provide funding up to $130,000 to construct a washroom facility building on the Fall Fair Association property. The City of Merritt will provide the project management services for the construction and the completion of the project, and we would also pay for all the project costs related to the installation of all required utilities. The Fall Fair Association would be responsible for any additional costs. The city is the last partner to sign this contract, and if council opts not to proceed with passing the resolution of the three remaining properties, or the three remaining parties would need to renegotiate amongst themselves to proceed with the project.
Thank you. We need a motion. Oh, hold on here. I'm losing my grip here. We need a motion, a mover that council authorize the mayor and corporate officer to sign the attached agreement, and that council authorizes the expenditure necessary to meet the city's obligation under the agreement. We can have them separately. Okay, let's do number one. That council authorize the mayor and corporate officer to sign the attached agreement. Okay, we have Councillor Christopherson and Luck. And
I will say, given if you authorize the agreement, we are by virtue committing to the expenditure, so you really can't treat them separately. I don't think they're one item. So if you have questions about that, we're all game, but I would treat it as one resolution.
thank you. So it is one resolution. We're looking for the mover, all in one. Okay, we have Christopherson and Etchart. And Councillor White, did you have a?
Well, do we know what the expenditure is, or we don't know that?
Mr. Smith?
So just to provide a very brief overview, there's two things that the city is really committing to with this project. One, it's the project management services. So that's a staff time expenditure. So the exact amount of staff time can't say, but it's something that is already costed because it's, like I say, just staff time. The second component to it is there's a commitment to pay for bringing the utilities to site. Don't have exact costing on what that is going to look like, but I think the prior estimate was about $26,000. And utilities are largely already on site, and so I think that cost has already been taken care of. So to make it a long story short, I think what has been spent has already, or sorry, to bring the utilities on, that money has already been spent. There's a little bit of financial work that I need to figure out whether they are going to require a rebate or whether those funds were already paid for by the city. So that's not the best explanation on planet Earth, but it's the explanation that I have for you.
So we don't know how much,
It will either be zero because the utilities have already been paid for, or it will be 26,000 if they paid for it, plus staff time.
okay.
Like I say, not the best explanation on planet Earth.
Thank you. And I can speak to my participation in this project where TNRD, both M&N, both Herb Graham and David Laird, were actively looking at helping the Fall Fair and the Rodeo grounds, because I think there's still money to come for that project from the TNRD. And this is looking at having TNRD donate $130,000 to two of our organizations here in town. And we talked about the in-kind services from the city as being a part of that. So it was to help them be able to get a washroom, a very needed washroom up at the Fall Fair site. Councillor Etchart.
Thank you. Yeah, with the amount of money that's being put into this facility, which has been a landmark for so many years, you know, even if it is the 26,000 and some in-kind time, it's a much smaller contribution, and we gain such a benefit from this that I can't help but think so many different organizations would benefit, because how many events happen throughout the year, and then it's just supporting different things that could happen there, because I'm not sure what the facilities are like now, but whatever's there is probably old and desperately needing repair, and so it just seems like a good investment in a piece of infrastructure that we'd like to maintain, so thanks.
Mr. Smith.
And I think they would be happy to have any members of council check it out, but it's a beautiful facility, big open space, but it's outhouses for the bathrooms right now. So it is a big, beautiful open space that could be used for a lot of things. I think there'd be lots of, country style weddings. They'd be thrilled to have, kind of events there. That is severely hampered by the fact that the minute the bride comes around the corner and you say, you want me to go to the bathroom and that, and we're going to look somewhere else, right? I'm just speaking really candidly. I think that this is going to hugely open up the ability for that property to be used. So I think you hit it on the head, Councillor Etchart.
And I was going to say, they also have a roof repair that needs repairing, and this is one of the reasons that TNRD got involved, because they really couldn't afford to do both jobs. Councillor White.
I support this because of the rodeo and the importance of the rodeo and the fall fair in the community. But what I am a little bothered with is asking to okay money that we really don't have a final total on. And even with, even though the staff time is in kind, it is a dollar value, and I think that these things need to come to us with a, even if it's out a little bit, one way or the other is one thing, but to just say, well, okay, well, we don't know. I'm not comfortable with that, but I will support it because it is the rodeo. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And I was going to say, we have, time is of the essence with this project. If we didn't sign fairly quickly, I think TNRD is going to pull out. So the fact that we're looking at this, trying to get it off, whether or not that has been paid for. We knew the in-kind value was going to be there, and it's not a cost to the city. And you're right, it is a value to the city, but it's not a dollar cost. And projects have been set aside so that there is time for this. So time is of the essence with this particular project. Any other comments? Can I ask the question, all in favor? Opposed, none, carried. Our next 8.3, MFA financing, 2021 Freightliner, Freightliner something or other. Freightliner, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a Freightliner pumper tender. So it's a term that they use at the fire hall for the equipment that is now in place, that was put in place in 2020. And amended on the previous bylaw, bylaw 2303-2021, up to the value of $480,000 in the 2020 plan. 300,000 of that is to come from financing. So this is the request for council to approve the borrowing of $300,000 over a 5-year term for the pumper tender equipment. As you can see, the previous one was, I had on here sold. It was actually donated to the Shack and Indian Band for the nominal value of $1. So that was good news for them to receive that piece of equipment as part of this transaction. So you can see that we did look at 4-year and 5-year terms as well. Slight savings on interest to go 4 years, but a fairly large annual increase in payments as well. So we selected $300,000 over the 5-year term.
And is everyone aware of why this is a purchased truck already? We're just taking the cash that we would have used out of our reserve and putting it into a loan at 0.91% financing with MFA over a 5-year period. Councillor Richard.
Go for the 5 years. We're getting more money with our money sitting in the bank right now than we're paying for the interest rate at 0.91%. Go for 5 years. That's what I say. Thank you.
Okay, and I guess we need a motion first. That Council of the City of Merritt authorized $300,000 to be borrowed under Section 175 of the Community Charter from the Municipal Finance Authority for the purchase of a 2021 Freightliner pumper tender, and that the loan be repaid within 5 years with no right of renewal. Councillor Christopherson, Etchart, any comments? Okay. All in favor? Opposed, none, carried. Okay, we're moving on to notices of motion. Does anyone have a notice of motion? Okay, well, I have a notice of motion. Looking at what we missed in our budgeting process was scholarships for School District 58. So I'd like to bring this forward as a notice of motion that council directs staff to include 2 scholarships worth $2,000 for students graduating Merritt Secondary School and continuing onto post-secondary education in the 2021-2025 capital plan. You said, yeah, financial plan, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Next time. Mr. Smith.
One clarification, is that 2 at 2,000 each or 2 totaling 2,000?
Well, I was thinking 2 at 1,000 each, but if,
So long as we know what the intent is.
yeah, it's negotiable. It's whatever we choose. So now we're looking at reports from council. Anybody have any reports? Moving right along, information item, our active transportation plan draft, Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the second rather large document on the agenda tonight is the draft active transportation plan. And following a fairly extensive community engagement back in the fall, as well as council input and staff input, the consultant has completed this draft and is now seeking further input from both council and the community. The document, including the appendices, is quite in-depth, of course, and at 152 pages, it contains a lot of great content. There are two parts of the document that Council may be most interested in, and that's appendices C and E. Appendix C, which begins at page 100 of the document, is the implementation plan, and it includes 9 categories and a total of 120 action items to be completed over the next 10 years. So quite a lot of work represented there for staff, but some really great recommendations. The 9 categories, I won't list the 120 action items, people can feel free to read at their leisure. But the 9 categories are network, integration, safety, universal design, maintenance, amenities, great streets, wayfinding, and education. Appendix E, the other document that's of particular note in the report, is the network map, or rather 2 maps. The first map on page 147 of the document shows the types of bike lanes, whether it be a bikeway with a painted bike symbol and shared street with vehicles, or a bike lane separated from cars by barriers, or a multi-use path, etc. So the different types of cycling facilities are illustrated there, and that's based on public input mainly. The second map on the following page shows the priority for each of those routes. So either low, medium, or high priority, shown with green, yellow, and red line work. There's also an illustration of the complex routes. They're highlighted, so in addition, whether they have green, yellow, or red identification, they're also surrounded by highlighting. So for example, Nicola Avenue is a high priority, as it was the #1 choice by residents in the community for a bikeway, but it's also a complex project. Because it requires Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure approval, of course, because it's a highway, and also the road varies from block to block along Nicola Avenue, so it creates some design challenges. Other appendices in the report include the existing condition summary, the bicycle facility design guide, which will be very helpful for staff, and detailed cost estimates, which are included on Appendix F. Staff and the consultant would greatly appreciate feedback from council and from residents on this draft plan. The document's been up on the city website since last week, and that's on the dedicated active transportation page, which is merritt.ca/ATP. And feedback can be submitted to staff at planning@merritt.ca. So if you email your comments, any members of the public that would like to provide input onto the draft plan, that would be great to hear those comments. And then following incorporation of these comments from council and residents, we'll be able to bring the final plan back to council next month, and then get our report into the provincial government before the end of March, which is our deadline for the grant funding application. So if anyone has any questions, maybe Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one bit, because Dawn did talk about the implementation plan happening over the course of the next 10 years. That doesn't necessarily mean that every project you see in here will be completed in 10 years. You guys will note in that we're looking at a $33 million kind of price tag in today's dollars for this. So realistically, that's not something that's going to be feasible, but the beauty of this is it gives us some nice discrete projects that we can now go out and get plans for, so that we're ready for grant applications. We will always have active transportation plans on the shelf, so we're ready at any moment for when those grant applications come up, that we'll have a great project and we'll just keep knocking them off in order of priority. So this is going to be we've talked a lot about, as council and staff, integrating master plans in the long run. This is going to be a huge addition to our master plan repertoire that will really direct the future of capital spending and grant applications for a lot of years to come.
Yeah, And I was going to say, I haven't read the plan in detail, but I'm looking forward to getting through it all. Is there an attempt to make some kind of a committee of the whole or a town hall, a give the plan back to the public kind of day?
Thank you, Your Worship. That's certainly something that we can look at. We already have a committee of the whole meeting scheduled in March, but if council would like to add another committee of the whole meeting for this, we could look at that.
I think it would help us, and I'm sure it would help the community as well, to just get a little bit better flavor of what we've got in here.
And would that committee of the whole meeting be to talk over the draft plan or to go over the final plan?
Is this the final?
This is the draft.
Oh, well then let's wait.
It's the final draft, yes.
Final draft.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. I think when the final, I think it's well, what do we think? I mean, do we put it out there in a draft and have the public look at it? And is there any room for any other pieces, another 4 or 5 million maybe?
Yeah, I mean,
I think that may have some value to it.
And the report is on the website already, so it has been since last week. So certainly any comments from the public can come in at planning@merritt.ca, and we can pass those on to the consultant to look at incorporating. But yeah, we can certainly do a committee of the whole when the final plan is adopted to go through it if you want to do that.
Mr. Smith, and then I'll go to
I know that
Councillor
a lot of what council's been looking for as well is when these plans get adopted, to kind of have those little snippet communication items to say, hey, here are the next projects on the docket for active transportation. Here's what you can look forward to over the coming years. So we can definitely work on some of the communications pieces as well, because I think that this is something that a lot of people in Merritt have been clamoring for. And this is a document that gives us that launching point to be able to do just that. So I'm not saying that needs to take the place of a committee of the whole, but ultimately I've personally found that committees of the whole don't necessarily benefit the public as much as we like to think they do in terms of the information getting out there. I think oftentimes it's the more direct communication that has a greater impact.
Yeah. Councillor Fair.
Thank you for the report. It's exciting. Especially to see that the priority chosen by the public is this, the section on Nicola Valley, because I think that stands to make a lot of improvement to the appearance of the entrance to our city at the same time as providing active transportation. So I think that's a pretty neat aspect. I also have one question about the section that leads from, looks like Rotary Park or Central Park up to Parker. Is that intended to be multi-use pathway switchbacks that go up, or would it be stairs, or I'm just trying to visualize that section?
Thank you, Councillor Fair, through the chair. Yes, so it would be a multi-use path so that it's accessible, not only to walkers, but also cyclists and people with strollers and in wheelchairs, et cetera. And you can see on the next map where it talks about priorities and complexity, that it's identified as a complex route because it is a switchback design, and it would require probably some, well, there would be some extensive engineering. We've already talked to an engineering firm about it. It wouldn't be a very a low-cost item. It would, yeah, there would be some cost to it. So it's definitely a complex project, but it's one that residents certainly identified as a need. So
yeah, it's I think a great connection from the bench down to the park there. They'll probably be very well used.
And there's a further connection as well, because we're looking at creating along the swale that was created in Central Park for the stormwater to create a trail there, so it would connect from that trail up from the bench down and then connect right to Vote Street. So it creates a complete route to then get to downtown. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you. We don't need to receive that for information. It's just an information item. So now we are closing this session, and I need a mover that the meeting be closed to the, we're going, that the meeting be closed to the public under Section 91A of the Community Charter. Personal information about an unidentifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality, or another position appointed by the municipality. So mover, Christopherson and White. And all in favor? Opposed? None.